Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to this important brainstorming session. You've already made clear this is complicated, and there are no simple answers. I can only start by saying Paul Krugman's wrong, and I'll elaborate a little bit about that. Of course, there are skill issues that are very serious. They're not the only thing, but they're not overblown. They're very, very serious. But there are other factors as well. Anything about this issue needs to be place specific. So anything that's said in general terms isn't going to apply for Greece specifically, and anything said about Greece doesn't translate in any automatic way elsewhere. There are some commonalities, but there are some differences. I was going to talk about some general principles, but I want to start with Greece, if I might, because this is a very particular crisis, one of the deepest economic crises that the world has seen in a couple of generations. And the crisis is not only about youth unemployment, though it's manifested that way with very high youth unemployment numbers. Greece is living through an economic catastrophe, and the youth unemployment is one part of it. The decline of GNP is another part of it. The massive burden of debt is another part of it. And to understand the youth problem in Greece, one actually has to start at the other end with the general economic crisis. And so if you'll permit me to do that, I just want to say a few words about that. I won't review all the issues, but I will start with a pertinent point, which is that Greece is the only country in crisis in Europe that has not had a significant export recovery. And this, I think, is a very signal fact for you to consider. Ireland, Spain, have export growth. They also suffered a big crisis, but they have some growth that's more than Greece right now. Greece is stuck. Collapse of the domestic economy and no real recovery coming from the outside. Greece's only way out of this crisis is export-led growth. So that's just a hard fact, because there won't be big domestic stimulus. I don't care how many thousand articles Paul Krugman writes about this, they're irrelevant for you. Nobody's giving Greece the money for big domestic stimulus. You're going to be under a squeeze for years to come. Domestic demand is going to be low and compressed. And so the only way out is export growth. And that's not happening. And that's where I would start the analysis. Where's the export response? Greece has a lot of things to sell. It's a wonderful country, very talented people, most beautiful country I know, from the point of view of tourism, from the point of view of many skilled people. But there's no supply response taking place right now. And so that's what I would ask you to ponder, to understand why businesses aren't able to find new sectors, new opportunities. What is it that's holding things back? There's a lot of money in the region. For example, the Middle East. This is your market. One of the problems is all the focus is on inside Europe, which is not Greece's main way to recover. Greece's main way to recover is by selling things to your neighborhood. And your neighborhood includes one of the biggest, richest markets in the world, which is the Gulf. And Greece has tremendous capacity in construction, in food processing for a region that wants the best food in the world, and I can tell you Greek food qualifies, both from a health point of view and a taste point of view, from many manufacturing activities and so on. But I don't see the supply response taking place. It's been a puzzle for me for several years. what exactly is happening? I think there are two big classes of problems. One is that the credit crisis is absolutely ferocious, and it remains ferocious till now. Small and medium enterprises can't get credit. Greece is living through the death of the banking system, and Europe's response financially has been pathetic from a policy point of view, because it's not just macro of stimulus and so forth, which I'm not so interested in. It's making sure that you have banks that can fund enterprises. And they're not working right now, and they haven't really gotten started properly as far as I can see. The other issue is the regulatory tax and other burdens on hiring and firing, employment, startup of business, really a lot of red tape, supply side burdens, because Greece is not a simple place to do business. And it's, in fact, notoriously hard in certain ways. So what I have been advocating for, and then there's one last major problem, which is not exactly news to you, which is that the debt is completely unmanageable. And Germany as a creditor is not an experienced creditor. So it doesn't understand the geopolitics of being a creditor. And it has been unwise in how it's handled these issues, mainly driven by domestic political considerations, not even by financial considerations, but by domestic political considerations. So Greece's youth unemployment problem requires actually a more general solution, which is a restoration of supply-led growth through exports by several factors: entrepreneurship to identify new markets, credit that is available for new markets, and a regulatory and tax environment that favors new startups and that favors new activities. And so this, I think, is the pragmatic approach. And then I have argued and suggested to the German government repeatedly, and I think it's not impossible at this stage, a very deep renegotiation of the debt. They will not cancel your debt, would be my guess, but they will finally come to an agreement to stretch it out over 40 years at 1 or 2% interest, so to lock in a very long, very low interest repayment profile that would just enable Greece to find its way through this very difficult process. It barely works, by the way, arithmetically. The debt is so high at about 160% of GNP, it's really hard to get down. You need growth in the numerator for the GNP to grow. You need low debt servicing by very low interest rates, predictable and locked in for a very long time. What Greece does not need is to go back to the bond market anytime soon, even though Greek officials say this every few weeks. To my mind, that would be a huge mistake, because you don't want to borrow at 7% interest rates or 5% interest rates. You can't afford it. There's no way that Greece can pay back interest that is above 1 or 2% on the stock of debt. And so a quick return to the capital markets in a sense of normalcy just means that there's no solution on the debt. And I don't like short-term maneuvers to give confidence that aren't backed up by long-term data. And so I don't really see a short-term return to the capital markets and then a nice headline for 1 week in the Financial Times or in Business Week or Bloomberg or whatever. That's not going to get you much. What Greece needs is a real long-term restructuring so that it has a perspective that you can look at 10 years, it's still around our necks, but 15 years, we're out of this finally, because growth has been enough and the debt has come down to 80% of GNP. The other way would be a little bit of a miracle of Europe saying, okay, forget half of it. I don't think it's going to happen. I've been in that business for a long time. I've negotiated lots of debt deals, and as a member of the Eurozone and with Germany as a creditor and with all the difficulties of Europe, I just view it as unmanageable to view for the miracle approach of somehow the principle being written down deeply on the publicly held portion of the debt. So all of this is to say, I think Greece needs a growth strategy that it doesn't have right now, and that needs to be a lot more clear, a lot more practical, a lot more export-oriented, looking at markets in North Africa, looking at markets in Turkey, looking at markets in the Gulf, looking at markets globally. Of course, tourism is an international attraction, and Greece has many opportunities with Asia as well. But it requires strategy. One interesting footnote to this is that some of these, one principle that I would advocate is carving out special rules for export-led growth. In other words, for new sectors and new markets and new industry, because Greece's economy as a whole is not going to be cleaned up overnight, and the rules are not going to be changed in some definitive way, my guess. So you have to do a kind of carve-out, and that's what a lot of good development is about. You create special zones or special sectors or special privileges or holidays for the next 5 years for new startups and so forth. It's not clean, but it's practical, and I would argue that. One of the difficulties of that is Brussels, which says, no, you can't do that, that violates the rules, that's state aid, and so forth. And I spoke with German officials about this a couple of weeks ago, and I think you'd actually get support of the German government and others to do something more practical and to say to Brussels, we need a practical emergency approach. There's nothing normal about Greece's situation. It shouldn't just be handled as a normal basis. It should be handled as a first-rate emergency, in my opinion. As a macroeconomist, I'm aghast at the situation. It's almost unseen since the Great Depression, and it's at the scale of the Great Depression. So it's not a small thing. It's actually a big thing, and it requires special rules and so forth. So that's Greece. Not a simple picture, but it requires a strategy, and it requires an accurate strategy. And it's not an easy message either. It's a lot of work, because the hole that Greece is in is pretty deep, and nobody's going to get you out of it very quickly. So it's going to be a lot of work to climb out of that hole. But I do believe the only way to do it is through export-led growth. And my own view is Greece has a lot to sell. And Greece has a lot of creativity, entrepreneurship, talent, and there's a lot of money in the neighborhood, but you just haven't been going to the places where the money is enough, because that's where the markets are. And you got to go win those markets more aggressively. And when you do that, then take 100 young people with you and let them have jobs in that employment as you're building this up. So that is, I think, without that, no specific targeted help for Greece is going to work. And any idea of debating old themes of Keynesian economics and stimulus and demand versus austerity and so forth, this is irrelevant for you, I'm sorry to tell you, in practical terms. That's for Krugman's columns, which I regard as wrong for the United States as well, but irrelevant for Greece. For Greece, you have a different situation, different problem, different reality, nothing easy about it, and you need to get working. And at least with me, you have an ally. I'll go to Brussels anytime and argue your case, and to Berlin anytime to argue your case. But what I would like to see clearly from Greece itself is a growth strategy that is clear, ambitious, sensible, aggressive, backed by the business community, and says we can do this. And here's how we can do it. Here are the sectors that count. Here are the projections of growth. Here's what we need from outside. Here's what we're going to do inside. And that way to move forward. By the way, when I said this to some of the Greek business leaders, they said, no, we can't do this. So there's a little bit of pessimism in at least some part of the entrepreneurial class that I find unnerving, because I want the entrepreneurial class to be the most ambitious, optimistic, aggressive side to say, we can do it if you just unshackle us. And that's really, I think, what needs to be designed. Now let me turn to the topic of this morning, about youth unemployment as a special category of issues. Because in addition to all of that macro discussion, there is a real discussion about young people. And young people deserve attention in any society, not just Greece, where the unemployment rate is unimaginably large, though its real meaning is also a little bit unclear, I would say, in general, what these data really mean. Basically, the right way, I think, to think about any problems of young people are by taking a human development or a life cycle approach. We start pretty helpless, and we have to develop, each of us, our health, our talent, our cognitive abilities, our educational attainment, and our skills to become productive. And so there is a kind of value chain for producing human capital that needs to be respected in any society. Few societies do it all that well. Northern Europe really does it better than almost all the rest of the world. The United States is a mess, by the way, in this, because we don't invest in young people. Families invest in their young people, and if they're well off, then their kids turn out with what they need, and if they're poor, then the kids don't turn out with what they need, and we end up with an incredibly divided society in this country. So when you think about the life cycle, the main points I think that are known about this are a lifetime of capacity starts at age 0. If there isn't attention from birth through the years of brain development, especially years 0 to 3 for basic brain development, and then ages 3 to 6 for basic cognitive development, then by the time you get to school, a child's already bearing a lifetime handicap. And so the first lesson I think almost everybody that looks at this agrees on is early childhood development is a part of later development. So starting with a 20-year-old is not the right place from a long-term perspective to start. Of course, second is the quality of the education system. Ours is a mess. I think the international standards on the PISA scores that the OECD puts out now every year are a good benchmark for any country. They really do test aptitude. The United States ranks about 25th to 30th in reading, in skills. Of course, very affluent kids rank near the top, but our society is completely income graded. I'm not worried about my own kids, but we live in a city where 3/4 of the kids in New York City will not ever have the skills that they need for middle-class life under the current conditions. And so this is a second part. Then, as Stelios mentioned, there's a lot of good and interesting attention to the school-to-work transition. And we know that in an age of pretty rapid technological change, what's learned in the schools doesn't translate into what is useful in the labor market. And again, we know that Germany probably has the best model of this. It's been about 100 years in development, but the apprenticeship programs, the vocational emphasis, the time that is a gradual transition from school to work is extremely important. The business sector needs to work with the education sector, basically. And the government needs to provide financing to help with apprenticeships and to help make that transition work. And clearly, there's nothing really like that in Greece. And we have nothing very much like that in the United States. We have a extremely weak facsimile of that in our community colleges, but it doesn't really work in the U.S. And so we also fall down badly. And then the final point is, what are you training for? The world's changing very fast, and it's not so simple to figure out where real jobs are going to be, and the jobs that were the traditional pathways to at least a decent working class life or middle class life are not going to be there. Many are no longer there. In the United States, we've lost about 8 or 9 million jobs in manufacturing, maybe about 8, from the peak, which was 1979 till now. We've been in a long, slow decline, and this is both, I would say, globalization and technology. We've had a debate for 25 years in the economics profession. Is it globalization or is it technological change? Whenever there's a long debate like that, of course, it's both. But since young researchers have to make their name not saying it's both, they have to take sides and then aggressively say it's one or the other. But when you have such a long debate, of course, it's many things going on, not just one thing alone. So globalization has meant lots of jobs that were in middle class, middle income or high income countries are in low middle class or low income countries now, because globalization has facilitated global production chains. And Greece is definitely in that category of high vulnerability to loss of jobs. Even in Eastern Europe, what might have been Greek jobs are Polish jobs. Ukraine will be next, trying to outcompete Greece on income levels, not on tourism, by the way, but on manufacturing jobs. And of course, Vietnam, China, India, Ethiopia, they're all lining up. So it's a pretty tough competitive world from the point of view of globalization. Technology, I believe, is also having a huge impact. Both business process automation and robotics are dramatically changing the workforce. And I'm of the view, when I look at the evidence, that this is going to accelerate dramatically. So I'm pretty much on the side of artificial intelligence and robotics is really transforming the workplace in the next 20 years. I think we are still in a period where I don't think there will be baristas in Starbucks in 5 or 10 years. You'll go in, your iris will be scanned on your Starbucks account. You will say, I would really like a grande mocha latte. Skim and voice recognition will do that, and then you'll watch your coffee being made, and there will be no one in the shop. And I think that will be a lot of business in the future, and why not? And it's actually a very interesting question. If robots really could do everything, would that be a good thing? Because, and I think the answer is basically yes. I had the occasion to visit the gorillas in Virunga National Park in Rwanda last year, and I do believe I saw the ultimate expression of human ambition, which is to sit in the grass all day, roll around, eat leaves and shoots, have sex once in a while, play games, and you can also do this on a beautiful beach or an island in Greece. And that's so if the robots would actually do all the work, we'd have to reorganize our society a little bit. But it is something that I think is actually needs some serious reflection. So I don't have time to elaborate except to say that we therefore have several crisis points. We lack early childhood development programs in most countries, including the United States. Not even. I mean, New York City's in the middle of a battle of trying to get early childhood development, but our progressive governor and Wall Street is lined up to oppose tax increases, even of a tiny amount, that could actually better fund these programs. It's just ghastly what an unequal society produces in policy outcomes. We have a big education financing crisis in that there are trillion of student loans now in the United States outstanding. A large part of these will go into default because the U.S. wants to run this as a market system, and we've encouraged lots of poor kids to take lots of debt, and then they don't even finish college and they end up bankrupt. But our bankruptcy law doesn't allow the write-off of student loans, and so we have neighbors in their 60s that are in desperate financial straits because they've been 25 years trying to pay off their student debts. It's quite a life, and this is America. We don't have adequate school-to-work programs. We have very few. There is a declining demand for labor, probably on these technological grounds. And then, as I emphasized, you can't solve these problems unless you have national development strategies. In other words, where is your country headed? What sectors are growing? This went out of fashion. The market's supposed to solve all these problems. Absurd. You need a view. Where is Greece going to be in 10 years? What's it going to be selling? What kind of markets? Not that you can guess that, but to help orient infrastructure, global negotiations, investment strategies, training strategies, and so forth. So I'm a believer in planning alongside markets. You need both. And we've eliminated most forward thinking in a lot of countries. I won't go through the data, except to say one issue about measuring Greece's unemployment is that we know that the meaning of high youth unemployment is tricky because the definition of the denominator, what's the labor force, is tricky since most kids are in school or in work. And so the concept that is preferred in general is the not in education or employment or training category, what's called NEET, N-E-E-T. And for that, Greece's unemployment or NEET rate, not in education, employment, or training, is about 20% of youth, not 60% of youth. And so one has to understand what's real. This understates the crisis. The unemployment rate a little bit overstates the crisis. This understates the crisis because there are a lot of Greek youth that are in school, but they're not really progressing in school. They're kind of registered. They may be taking a class if they can. They're counted as in education, but they don't have a job. They don't really have progress in the educational attainment. And so I would say the true crisis is very big, but what the right number is a matter of needing some care. There is good evidence that youth have borne the brunt of the recent crisis more than older workers, which is surprising. But the bump up in unemployment or the bump down in employment rates of young people has been greater. And I do think that suggests this shift against labor coming from technological change is probably playing a role in what's happening. And there's a lot of evidence that young people's earnings are declining relative to older cohorts' earnings. This is data for the United States. You see that for older workers, income stopped rising back in the 1970s. We've been in a kind of dead labor market for 30 years. All of the gains of income have gone to the top 1% or to capital income, but not to the median workers. But look at the young households or younger households. They've had a significant decline of incomes since the late 1970s. So I think that there is evidence that, and the amount of the proportions of households headed by young people in poverty has also gone up, whereas the elderly have not had more poverty because the older people, at least in this country, are protected by Social Security and Medicare, whereas young people are finding they don't have employment, they can't get jobs, or their jobs are very low-earning jobs. So we really are in a crisis of younger people. So I want to say that there is a structural youth crisis that I think is real around the world. The other thing that is worth recognizing is that the overall share of labor in the economy, something that we when I studied labor economics 41 years ago from that gentleman. Not 41, it was 38 years ago, sorry, 38. We took more or less the labor share as being relatively constant, but there is a decline of the share of labor in national income, and that is another piece of evidence, in my view, of the underlying technological shifts against labor that are this mix of globalization and technology and both implicated in this. So let me just say one word about Baxter. That's our friendly robot of choice of the current robot generation. Very efficient, effective, does a lot of good work on the shop floor, can assemble things, can pack things, and the question is analytically, what is this turn to robotics really meaning for society? It's going to be one of the most interesting discussions over the next 10 years, and there's an intense analytical effort underway to try to understand this. And I'll just give you one sense of a theoretical problem that can result from this. You asked the question, suppose robots really could do most of the work. In principle, this would make humanity better off because we would have more leisure time, we would have higher productivity, and we shouldn't smash the machines in general. But the introduction of more effective robots does potentially pose a significant shift in income distribution. And who loses with this? Those with basically unskilled labor, because what robots devalue is, at least for the moment, they devalue unskilled labor. Maybe soon they will replace professors also. And I think, by the way, they probably could. We say the same thing each year, and now we're putting it online. We don't even have to be there exactly. But in any event, at least for the moment, it's unskilled labor. Well, who has unskilled labor? Young people. They don't have experience, they don't have the skills, they don't have the training. So at least in a theoretical way, you could expect that the introduction of automation, business processing, artificial intelligence, and robotics would weigh most heavily against younger workers. And so that would be consistent with the data. What would the implication be from society's point of view? The odd point is that it's theoretically possible, it's just a concept, that future generations lose badly from what is potentially a good thing for society. And the reason is, if young people really find themselves displaced badly, young people are not only in need of their own incomes, they're the source of future saving in the economy. And so if there's a shift against demand for labor and a shift towards capital, who benefits in that shift towards capital? People who own the stock market. So we have a booming stock market right now. Profits are very, very high, partly because of the high returns to capital that are being enjoyed right now. Older people own the stock market. Consumption is great. I can tell you the restaurants in New York are absolutely filled. There's a boom of consumption underway in the United States. But young people are displaced and they don't have saving for the future. So the odd part is maybe only one generation benefits from this, those who are enjoying the stock market boom right now. It feels so good. And by the way, rich people are very happy in this world. They've never had it better as long as they feel safe. But they shouldn't feel too safe because the world underneath is not very stable. So the odd theoretical or conceptual point is that we could end up in a spiral, downward spiral, even from a great technological advance. And I've written a paper like that, that's what academics do, which shows theoretically you have a pure productivity gain. Robots can do a lot more than they used to do. They displace young people. The young people's wages go down. The old people who own the older people, please, who own the robots have a boom of consumption, but the young people don't save. And so what happens is future generations find themselves without the capital, and you get a long-term decline. It looks something like this. One generation has a boost, and everybody else suffers in the future. It's a paradox. But there is one way out, though no one likes it. It's possible because it is a pure technological improvement. Economic theory tells you something that improves society's productivity potentially can make everybody better off. How do you ensure that the benefits are spread? You have to do some redistribution. So instead of just having the older generation enjoy their stock market boom, the older generation should pay a bit more taxes, and that should be transferred to young people, or reverse Social Security. Help get young people started in life. And then they'll have the income to get started. If we gave a young demogrant to every young child so that they could grow up with the household robot doing the work for them, then everybody can be better off generation to generation. So the point is that technological change redistributes income not only across skill categories, but across generations. And maybe that's what's happening now also. Maybe in part what's happening is that there's a shift of income from the young to the old because of technological change. We're the beneficiaries of it because we own stock, we have equity. But young people who only own their labor are the losers in that. And rather than taxing them to fund Social Security, maybe we ought to be taxing us to fund young people as part of the solution. I'll stop there. Thanks. Sure. Of course.
We're running a little bit late. We can take a couple of questions. Please be clear and precise. Ask direct questions and avoid long statements, please. Thank you.
You don't know what it's like, by the way, talking about labor economics in front of your teacher. I feel like it's an hour exam here. I mean, an oral exam here.
Professor Goodman.
Thanks, Jeff. That was great. Could you remind us, please, the role of startups and small enterprises, even in our own society, our own economy, in terms of the role that the small enterprises play?
Well, of course, small enterprises have the dynamism of the most job creation and the most job loss. But they're also the key to a tremendous amount of innovation. So small enterprises, when successful, become big enterprises or become bought up by big enterprises and fuel a lot of the dynamism of the economy. And therefore, they're really crucial. If we just sat with an existing structure of large enterprises, it would be a pretty boring economy without the dynamism, without the technological advance. And so I would say it's not so much the net job creation, because there's a lot of job destruction in small enterprise too, but it is the dynamism. That's where things get started. That's where new sectors are born. And that's where some of them scale up to be big enterprises. So if the small enterprise sector is blocked, as it has been in Greece, blocked by the lack of finance and by the regulatory environment, it's definitely a killer for long-term growth. Hey, Alan.
Jeff, it's also scary for me to be asking a question of the man I took international finance from 28 years ago. You're, as always, and even more so these days, an inspiration. Let me just quickly try to come to the point. For the practitioners in this room and for the Niarchos Foundation, part of what I think we're hoping to do is generate pilot projects where we can demonstrate proof of concept and then try to get the governments to take part, be it Greece or Portugal or wherever. Could you just, you've obviously been a leader in trying to do that in various things you've done over the world. So whether it's education or investment in youth and some of the things you listed, what are some guidelines from your experience for how to get a pilot project going, for how to turn the thought into action?
I would choose, and Adam, this is a great sequence of Wonderful. Adam does such wonderful work, so it was great that he has helped you on putting this brainstorming together. I would say, based on my sense of what strategically is most important for Greece, and that would be small and medium enterprises entering new export-oriented markets. That's where I would focus the attention. And so I would ask the question, where could a difference be made? Is it in the construction sector? Is it in food processing? Is it in the energy sector? What markets? Because I do have the view that the Middle East must be, the Gulf must be a good market for Greece. And so my view is I would stay away from the domestic market because that's not where the real breakthroughs need to be made. Of course, there will be a domestic market employing most people, but that's not where the incremental growth for Greece is going to come from in the recovery phase. I wouldn't start with the hardest kind of sector. I would start with something that looks right, and I would ask the question, what's blocking this? Why aren't more firms doing X? Or even better, if you see some seedlings in some key sectors that here are 3 or 4 firms doing interesting things. Oh, I didn't know you could sell so-and-so to this market. That's the best way to identify something interesting that can be done. Then I would say design a program that aims with quantitative targets and goals that in 5 years we'd like to get the exports in this sector up by the following amounts. And what we need to do is we need financing, we need regulatory forbearance, we need more flexible employment, and a number of enterprises are going to come together with youth training. And so we're going to take applications of 20,000 young Greeks, and we're going to find a fantastic 200 to get this thing started and make the growth start and show here is a path to recovery that doesn't depend on miracles, doesn't depend on domestic stimulus, doesn't have to wait for Germany or EIB or anybody else. It's not the full solution, but it would show a path that could be followed by others. And that's what I would do.
One more question,
How about
please.
Alan Kruger?
One more,
Yeah, Alan.
please.
The mic here.
I have a macro question for you. Wages have fallen roughly 20% in Greece, partly because of the IMF's recommendation that they cut the minimum wage. Prices have hardly fallen. The CPI is down roughly 2%. I suspect this is highly related to your observation that exports have not spiked, have not jumped. Why do you think this has been the case? Is industry too oligopolistic? Lack of competition? Would you expect prices to drop in the future given the big drop in labor costs, and that will help exports?
I don't know the answer, and obviously in detail. I haven't looked enough. I believe that a lot of what's happened in Greece has been a supply-side contraction through the financial markets. So I believe that it's not only an aggregate demand shift, but actually an aggregate supply shift that has come by an absolutely ferocious credit crunch, as severe as anything I've ever seen in my own. I mean, that's not quite true. I've seen something comparable, but this is quite bad. Basically, starting in 2009, the Greek banks were defunct, and Europe had no strategy on how to maintain credit. The U.S. did much better in keeping liquidity. We had, of course, a different opportunity from what Greece individually had. And Greece could get no hearing at all in Berlin or Brussels about the credit squeeze. And the IMF knew about it but was mute So Europe never had an appropriate banking response to this crisis. And I really hold Germany to account for this. German macroeconomics is balance your budget. And I'm not against that, by the way, in a lot of ways. But it's not about the credit market realities. And this, I think, is a huge problem, is my guess. I don't know if it's still the same, but 2 years ago when I was really looking intently at this, small firms could not get letters of credit. They certainly couldn't take on new projects, and they couldn't meet payroll because they had no working capital. And so it was just it was like the US late 2008, but it was prolonged in Europe for 3 years because there was no response to the Greek banking crisis and the more general Eurozone financial crisis. When Mario came in, the overall credit squeeze eased a bit, but I don't think the credit squeeze for SMEs in Greece eased all that much. And so my sense is that that's part of the problem here.
One more, please state your name and your affiliation. And people will have an opportunity, we will have breaks, and we'll have an opportunity to meet other people and ask questions. I know that this is a topic that begs from the audience to participate, and we are running again on a very tight schedule, so I really apologize if we cannot accommodate everyone, but I'm hoping that people will talk to each other during the breaks.
Rania Antonopoulos from the Levy Economics Institute. A follow-up to the last question. In fact, for youth, the reduction in minimum wage has been 32% legislated. For everybody else, 22% by mandate. Given what you so poignantly pointed out earlier about both exports, but also the challenge the youth face in terms of very low wages that they receive, would you be amenable to a return to the previous minimum wage? As it is now, it is both depressing domestic demand and putting a strain on payroll taxes, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the decline of the wages means that Greece is, from a cost point of view, competitive in export markets. And so I wouldn't actually, before you get recovery going, I wouldn't start boosting minimum wage right now. I'm not a big fan of an aggregate demand view of this crisis. Aggregate demand has crunched the domestic economy, no doubt. But Greece can't sustain internal demand unless it has more exports, because who's going to finance it? No, yeah, the minimum wage will, what worries me is even if at this wage you don't have exports going, why do you think that raising the minimum wage is going to somehow be a good trigger for getting what I think is the key step? So I would put the focus on the supply response first. And that's my guess. You know, I'm not an expert in the local conditions. But what worries me most is that Greece is not growing through exports. And that's where I would put the question mark. Why? What's holding things back? Certainly not the wage level. It would work in any event the other direction. If you want to raise minimum wage out of aggregate demand, I would say you can't really sustain that very much. And if the supply side, and I am basically, again, worried about getting a good answer to what's holding up. If you have massive unemployed resources and you're a small open economy, the logic is that the escape valve is not domestic demand, but net exports. That's what's happening in Ireland. That's what's happening in Portugal. That's what's happening in Spain. It's not happening in Greece. So I would benchmark Greece against those other crisis economies because all the economies experience the same downward shock, but seem to be experiencing a different upward response. And I would take that benchmark and ask the question, why? I don't think that the recovery in those other countries is an internal-led recovery. I think, and it's not much of a recovery, but it's at least a recovery, more than Greece. And so I would ask the question, compare Greece to Ireland, Portugal, Spain. What do you see as different? What do you see as similar? My guess is that the supply side response is weaker in Greece. And that's what I would try to unlock, figure out why that is.
Madam Minister, and this is the last one.
The OECD identified regulatory burdens in Greece. The Greek government recently, very recently actually, fully adopted the OECD toolkit that basically eliminates regulatory burdens. This is part of a package of reforms that we have been doing, but of course there's a very big debate whether reform alone is enough. The big debate, of course, is that with these reforms, we create a better competitive environment for large multinational enterprises to operate in Greece, rather than supporting SMEs, which were up to, before the crisis, the backbone of the Greek economy. So my question is whether you believe that we should open up to the large multinational enterprises to operate in Greece, or whether we should support SMEs. And whether we can create more jobs opening up to the large operations to function in Greece, or whether we should go ahead with supporting small and medium-sized enterprises. And because I represent, the second question, if I may be allowed to ask a second question, is tourism currently represents 18% of Greece's GDP. It has the potential to grow a lot more. We had a very big increase last year. It's definitely one of the sectors that can support the Greek economy. But then again, we have the debate on whether we should focus on one sector of the economy or whether we should diversify. So my question would be whether we should indeed explore the potential to grow tourism or whether we should focus more in diversifying. Thank you.
Good. I think in general, these are not either or options. So I would think that Greece would be interested in attracting multinationals to operate in Greece in a number of sectors, but also promoting SMEs, which, as you say, are a backbone of the Greek economy. Since the unemployed resources or underemployed resources are so huge, you're not really having to choose one or the other. You can move forward on both fronts, and that's what I would think. And similarly, when it comes to the question of promoting tourism, I think that it would be possible to identify probably 5, maybe 8 sectors where one would say these are good growth potential sectors because Greece has the technology, the know-how, the culture, the tradition, the interest, the training, the experience, and so forth to do this. Of course, tourism is one of those. And there are many others, obviously, construction, shipping, trade services, many things. And I do think that it would be a good idea to have a sense of the multiple fronts rather than simply choosing one, but actually trying to create a framework for growth across a number of sectors and do a kind of gap analysis. What's missing here? Maybe after the regulatory reforms, you say, well, nothing's missing. Get out there and do something. I haven't looked at the regulatory reforms. I know that the labor market issues have always been huge in Greece. I doubt that those are settled by these reforms because I can't imagine the government touched those and that I wouldn't have heard about it. And so on the labor market, my advice would be carve out a special labor regime for special sectors where you're aiming for export-led growth. because you probably can't win a general deregulation of all labor market relations. That'd be my guess, but maybe that's wrong. But what you can do is, like many, many countries, to say these are our pioneer sectors, or these are our growth sectors, or these are our special sectors. In this sector, hiring and firing is easier because we're only hiring. We're getting started. We're moving forward in the following sectors. And that kind of carve-out is politically easier, and it tends to move upward, and it's a pragmatic approach. And it's much better than sitting and having 10 years of debate about labor market reform, which doesn't happen. And I know a lot of countries that have 10 or 20 years of just debate about labor market reform. And by the time a center-right government gets around to doing something, you have a center-left government in, or a left government. So, you don't necessarily have the fortitude political fortitude to carry through very deep reforms, because the politics are very fraught in conditions like this. And finding some way that is more or less understood as, here's a pragmatic middle path forward that can carry us through but is sufficient to get the job done, is key. And a difficult part of reform is you may think you've done enough, but businesses have a checklist. And if you've done 3 things, but 2 that they really care about have not been done, it might not be enough. And so if you've done certain kinds of registration rules, but the labor market problems are not solved, or the tax problems are not solved, or some other problems are not solved, then it's debating points, but it's not making the recovery adequate. I can't judge. I can only just share experience on that.
Thank you very much,
Good.
Professor
Thank
Sachs.
you.
Thank you.